Hello, this is Mike at Gamefromscratch, and welcome to another episode of the Game Development for Complete Beginners tutorial series. Now we're almost done with learning Lua. We've got 2 more sections, and then we're going to jump into actual game programming using Love. So thank you for sticking with me. I hope the basics of programming are clear in your head now. We've just got a couple more things to cover. In the next chapter, we're going to cover tables, very important concept to Lua. And today we're going to talk about program flow. Now, until now, we've actually just had our program basically start at the top and go to the bottom. Now, the only difference was we added functions, so we can sort of jump into a function, but for the most part our code has been very linear, and this isn't the way most games are structured. A lot of times you'll have to do things over and over again, or sometimes you'll do them conditionally. You'll only want to do something if a condition is met, and those are the 2 things we're going to look at today: loops and ifs, or loops and conditionals. And let's jump right into the code. Now let's start off with a very simple basic loop, and this is called a for loop. And this basically just iterates until your conditions are met. I'll type the code first, and then we'll go backwards from there. So simple for loop goes for I equals, then say 1, 3 do end. Okay, so that is the loop, and what this basically is saying is it creates a variable for an index or a counter variable. Now, there's a standard in programming to call it I. It's just been convention for either index or iterator, and it's been that way forever. So it's just a programming convention to be called I. You can name this any valid Lua variable name. So no starting with a number, underscore is the only character allowed, that kind of stuff. But I is a very popular one for dealing with loops. And this is a local variable. So this will only be declared within this, as we called it earlier. This is a scope. This end is the end of the scope for this for variable. So we're creating this variable called I, but it's a temporary variable that's only good until here. Now you don't have to. You could have created a variable external, but this is the way it's generally done. So what you're saying is here is create a variable called I and give it the value of 1. And then in this loop, we're going to say until 3 do this. So this is basically saying for 1, 2, 3. So 1, then 2, then 3 do, and then whatever is inside the scope. So in this case, I'll just do print hi. I'll go ahead and run that. Actually, I'll print the value. Never mind. Let's print I. It'll make more sense. So there we go. Go ahead and run our code, and you'll see the end result. It runs print 1, 2, and 3, and done. So that is a simple for loop. And as I said here, the first one here is just basically your starting point, and your next value here is your ending point. Now there's another option in Lua to actually say the step by. So let's instead make this 1 to 10. And instead now we'll add another variable here called for value of 2. And what this is saying is for 1 to 10, so 1 to the value 10, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, step by 2. So I'll show you the end result of running this code. So let's save that and run, and now you'll see it just ran every other line. That's because it's stepping by 2. So you can think of this basically as starting point, your bounds, and your stepping amount. So that's a simple for loop, and this allows you to loop things as many times as you want. Now I want to iterate though. Once again, that this, sorry, bad pun. This value right here is local. So when it's declared in this way, if I go ahead and I print it after we're done this loop, you'll now see it also prints the value nil, because that variable has no value outside of that loop. So if you want to take that value, you either need to have declared it like this, and then it will carry over, or you have to take a copy of it inside. So that is a for loop, and a for loop with a stepping value. Next up, we're going to look at something that is going to jump ahead a bit. So I'm not going to go into a whole lot of details about how this one works, but we're going to loop through using an iterator. So I wanted to cover this under loops, but this is more about tables. So when we cover tables, we'll come back, and this will make more sense. But this is something you will do all the time in Lua. So I figured I would show it under the looping section. And for example, I'm going to create a very simple table. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Yeah, we'll stick with the weekdays only, so you don't have to keep seeing me type this stuff. Friday. All right. So I will explain the details of what we did a little bit later on, but basically that is the format, or one of the formats for declaring a table in Lua. Tables are very powerful in Lua, but I'm going to get into them later on, so don't worry about this one too much. But I just wanted to, again, show you this while we were in loops. So now what we're going to do is I, comma, v. Now v is a little bit different because v is going to get its result from something called an iterator, which is a function that returns the next entry in a list. So v in, using a special keyword, and then there's a function called pairs, and you pass it a table. And then I will just simply go do, and then we'll just print out the value of v. And I'll explain this a little bit better in a second. All right, so here's another style of, and if I print and run this, you'll see it just went through and listed all of the values in that table. Now, all that we're doing here is basically v is being returned the next value, more or less, or the results we're going to iterate over by this thing called pairs. And pairs is a special function in Lua for dealing with name value pairs in a collection. Now, a name value pair is a very common data structure. Basically, you'll have a key and the value that goes with it. So in this case, the key is the position 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, where the value is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So this is returning back. The v value is the value of that result. So this is a way of iterating through an entire table. Now, if you want it to be in order, there's another iterator called iPairs. Now, you need to use pairs and iPairs a whole lot. And don't worry if this part confused you a little bit. I just wanted you to see it here. It's a very common looping structure, but you really need to know more about tables before what I just did is going to make any sense. So just be aware you can loop through a table or a collection using the pairs and iPairs iterators functions, and iPairs is ordered versus pairs, which is not ordered. Now, that is that. Now we're going to move on to another kind of loop, and this is a while loop. And let me show you with a real example. So, is player dead? We're going to create a local variable called, it's of type Boolean, basically saying, nope, the player is not dead. We're also going to give the player some hit points. Okay, so at this point in time, we have a living player and he has 42 hit points. Now what we want to do is loop until this player isn't dead, or sorry, is dead. Is dead. Okay, so is player dead equals false. Important thing here, remember we talked about operators very early on? There's the equal, single equal, which is an assignment operator, double equals, which is a comparison operator. So what we're basically saying is this value the same as this value, or in English, is player dead currently false? So note the double equal versus the single equal, big difference. One assigns a value, the other one compares a value. And then same basic structure as we had before with the for. It's just in this case we use a while, and then we're going to do what's inside. And again, it's all scoped. So this is the end of the while statement. Now we're going to introduce another operator, which is an if statement. This is where your conditionals come in. So we can check to see if something has a certain value. And what we're just going to simply do is say if player HP is less than or equal to 0, then is player dead is now true, and print player is dead. Okay, so this is basically just an if test to see if the player's current hit points are below 0 or equal to 0, then we're going to evaluate what is inside of its block to true. Okay, and we could just end that with this, and that will define a block of code, and that's perfectly valid. But we're also going to have an otherwise. So this is what's going to happen if the player's hit points are less than or equal to 0. But what happens otherwise? Well, then we use a code called else. What else allows us to do is run the condition of if this isn't true. And in this case, what we're going to do is print not dead cur HP. And remember, we're using ... which is the string append operator, and player HP, like so. So we're just going to print out that they're currently not dead and what their current hit point status are. And most importantly, we're going to take their current hit points and subtract 1. So eventually the player will, in fact, die. So now let's go ahead and save that. And there you see, it ran through. They had 42 hit points and 41, etc., until they got to 1 hit point, at which point the next loop through, that would put them at 0, which makes the condition true. The player is dead, and it responds accordingly. And then our while loop finishes execution, because now, as you can see here, after this loop through, player is dead is set to true, so this is no longer good, so that it exits out of the while loop and ends and done. And this is called a while loop. It's kind of, you can do the same sort of thing with sorry, I can't speak today. Where the for loop is a while loop, but a while loop basically is what you do as long as a condition is true. Now there's another kind of while loop that you can use, which is almost the exact same thing with a very minor nuance. Like so. All right, 1 second. I'm off my script and I'm screwing something up. Oops, sorry. My working in other languages is crossing me over here. What we want to do instead is use something called repeat until. So this is the exact same thing as a while do loop that we just did. The only difference here is this will run at least once. So if you want to guarantee that your loop body, so basically that this code inside of here is always run at least once, even if the condition is never true, then you do a repeat until. Otherwise you do a do while. Now in a lot of languages, it's a while and a do while are different things. In Lua they're not. Instead you use repeat and until. So that is the majority of your conditions that we've got. Now there is one other thing that I didn't really talk about, and this was your if statements. So we used an if earlier on. Ifs are very powerful. So we can do something like if player's HP is greater than 10, then. And we'll go print, not bad. But as we saw earlier, you can do like this. So basically you can say if something is true, otherwise, and so if it's true, it does this, otherwise it does that. Now we can also add one more in there, or as many more as you want, called else ifs. And we can just keep adding the conditions on, and we can also have multiple conditions if we want. So in this condition, if the player has more than 5 hit points but less than 10 hit points, this code will evaluate. And we could keep adding else ifs to the how cows come home. Now, if you come from another language or come from another programming background and you're looking for a switch statement or a case statement, it does not exist in Lua. So you have to use a combination of ifs and else ifs to make the same result. If you've got no idea what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. It completely doesn't matter. But that's about it. That's all I really wanted to cover today. That is the basics of control flow. So you can do conditions, you can do tests, you can do loops. There's the for loop, the while loop, and a repeat until loop. But for the most part, they work very similar. And then what we saw also was a loop using an iterator across the table, which I just wanted to show you using the pairs and iPairs method. But that is all about tables, which we are going to cover up next. And then, as I promised, we'll get into Love 2D development. So thanks for sticking with me. So see you soon. Cheers. Bye.